call to order the MPOJC Urbanized Area Policy Board meeting of Wednesday, November 15th. First, recognize alternates. Do we have any? Mike Hench is here for the county. Is that it?
And I'm here for Lori Ropeman.
All right. Phil Hemingway here for Lori for the school district. All right. Item 1B, consider approval of the meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second?
Moved by Donahue, seconded by Dickens. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? They pass. Item 1C, set the next board meeting date, time and location. We're looking at January 31st, tentatively hosted by North Liberty. I'm assuming we probably have some time constraints.
Yeah, we'd like to set it as late as possible because we need to get the budget prepared and ready for the board.
Okay. All right. So please make sure you get that on your.
Good to know.
Make sure you get those on your calendar. So January 31st, and we'll make sure to give you the location as once we get that confirmed. Okay. Item 2, any public discussion of any item not on the agenda? Anybody in the audience who'd like to address us? Seeing none. Do you have some?
Yeah, thank you. Seeing none, I just want to acknowledge that this will be the last meeting for a few of our current board members. Brian Wason has served on the board for less than a year, but we're happy to have had him and appreciative that he filled the vacant seat left in North Liberty when Amy Nielsen moved to the State House. Terry Dickens, who has served since 2010, if I figured that out correctly. Yeah, that's right. And last but not least, Dave Ricketts. Dave is at his retirement reception currently and won't be able to make the meeting.
He'd do anything to get out of one of these.
Yeah. I talked to Dave earlier. Dave was the first ever board chair from the University of Iowa and served in 2008. And as far as we can tell, Dave had been on the board since 1981, this board since 1981, when the MPO was actually designated by the governor of the state of Iowa. And in fact, I think he was actually on, at the time it was JCCOG, but our predecessor before that even, the Johnson County Planning Commission, I believe it was called.
Wow.
So 30 plus years for Dave. So congratulations, everybody. I appreciate it.
Oh, you get a plaque.
I want a speech. Terry.
Okay,
Yeah.
you don't want a speach.
Terry?
I went and saw it, Dave. Thank you. There's a ton of people at this retirement today.
Oh, I bet.
All right, moving on. Item 3A, appoint a nominating committee for calendar year 2018 Urbanized Area Policy Board officers.
Yes, thank you, Kent Ralston, Executive Director. At your next meeting, which will be in January, you will elect a chairperson and vice chairperson for the calendar year 2018 board. The chairperson, of course, is responsible for presiding over the meetings, and the chairperson and director are also responsible for putting together the agendas for each meeting. As director, it's been
does that.
Yeah. As director, it's been my practice to discuss those agenda items with the chairs prior to all the meetings and make sure everything runs as smoothly as possible. What I'd like from the board tonight is that you please consider appointing a 3-person nominating committee for the chair and vice chair for 2018. Past practices has not included the director in those discussions, but I'm happy to help if and when I can. As you know, Susan Mims is the current chair. This is Susan's second year serving as chair of the board, and our bylaws state that she cannot serve again. There's a 2-year maximum consecutive term limit for that. Steve Berner is vice chair. This is Steve's also second year as vice chair, and he will not be able to serve as vice chair again. He could as chair, but not vice chair. So what we would like is a 3-person nominating committee that'll have some discussions between now and January and nominate a chair and vice chair for 2018 at our January meeting. If there are any volunteers. And
If
typically we try to get 3 from different communities.
Mike Carberry from the county.
I'll do it.
Terry Donahue, North Liberty.
I'll do it.
Louise Fromm, University Heights.
Thank you very much. I'll reach out to all of you between now and the next few weeks and just make sure we're all on the same page.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Item 3B, confirm which entities will nominate Johnson County representatives to the ECOG Board of Directors.
Yeah, again, under the MPO bylaws, each January, the Urbanized Area Policy Board appoints 3 elected official representatives to the ECOG Board of Directors. That's the East Central Iowa Council of Governments Board of Directors, as well as 1 citizen representative. The elected officials are, of course, elected. The citizen representative just needs to be a citizen that resides within Johnson County. And the appointments are made according to a following rotation that's actually stated in our bylaws. One elected official seat will be filled by the two largest entities, which go back and forth every year. That's Johnson County and the City of Iowa City. The current representative is from Johnson County, so the 2018 representative is scheduled to be designated by the City of Iowa City. The next is that there's one elected official seat filled by the third through fifth largest entities that alternate annually. The current seat is held by the City of Coralville, so the 2018 representative is scheduled to be designated by the City of North Liberty for this year. Excuse me. And And one elected official seat will be an elected official from the remaining entities, which from the urbanized area entities as well as the rural entities, and they alternate annually. The current seat is held by the City of Hills, with the 2018 representative to be scheduled by the City of Shueyville. And then last but not least, there's the one citizen representative that is appointed. The current seat is held by Aaron Meniza, and Aaron's actually going to give us an update later this evening. Aaron resides within Johnson County, and he's been in that position for 2 years. So what I'd like from the board tonight is whether you'd like to see Aaron continue for a third year, if he's interested, or if we should advertise for another citizen representative.
Okay. All right, so the municipalities, Iowa City, we have our organizational meeting after the first of the year, so we'll get that. I'm assuming City of North Liberty will do similar. City of Shueyville will take care of theirs. So then the question is on the citizen representative. People's thoughts.
If he'll do it.
Terry, the ECOG is not, I've served on it. It's not an entity that you jump right in and can follow everything they're doing and what the nuances are in terms of their responsibilities and that sort of thing. So I guess my first thought would be that if Aaron is interested and willing to continue, that would be our first approach. And if he has decided that 2 years is enough, then we would advertise. So that
I would agree with you. It takes a couple years for sure to get your feet under you and
Yeah.
kind of know what's going on there.
yeah. So any other? Okay, then we'll approach it that way. We'll be talking to you, Aaron, and see what you're.
Put him on the spot.
No, I won't
Yeah.
do that. We'll
Meeting times that they have, is it a general schedule?
Yeah, that's the other difficult part about
Yeah.
ECOG. They have monthly meetings, and it's the last Thursday every month, I believe, in the early afternoon. So yeah, at 1 o'clock. So they're a little tough to get to, and that's another thing. I know Aaron's been very good about attending, as have really all of our ECOG representatives. So that's good as well. So I will reach out to Iowa City, North Liberty, and Shueyville and make sure that everybody's aware that it's their turn to appoint somebody to the East Central Iowa Council of Governments. I'll also be in discussion with Aaron to see if he's interested, and if not, we'll go ahead and advertise for the position.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item 3C, preliminary discussion of the fiscal year 19 MPOJC budget.
Yeah, thanks. So prior to the preparation of the budget, which you'll see this coming January, it's been my practice to discuss proposed changes with this board, of course. This is the last meeting before January, so this is the time to discuss any changes we want to see so that we can have that budget prepared and ready for your approval. I've attached pages from the current year FY19 budget for your reference, and I think everyone knows, but administratively, the MPO employees are organized under the City of Iowa City. The focus and the purpose of the MPO remain to fulfill state and federal requirements necessary for local communities to receive state and federal transportation capital and operations funds, as stated in your memo, to produce locally generated traffic studies to support transportation-related decisions and capital project decision-making, to coordinate transit planning and transit reporting consistent with state and federal requirements, to assist local entities with review of development proposals, which is something we've been doing more and more of lately, and to serve as a forum for other regional issues that take place in the county. Capital expenses, I anticipate, will be very similar next year, in FY19 to what they are this year. And we have replacement schedules for our traffic counting equipment, software, maintenance, that sort of thing. However, as you may have seen in your memo, I am proposing to change the level of MPO staffing for FY19 by adding a 0.5 or half-time, full-time equivalent. This still leaves us about a half-time position short of where we were at in 2015, just to put things in perspective. So for about 5 years now, we've been running a little bit lean. This is something I brought to you last year, but there was some concern from Iowa City and other communities once we got to the board level about uncertainties in state cutbacks, basically, and the state rollback with multifamily residential. So there were some additional concerns about uncertainties in your own budgets, and we decided not to move forward. The proposed increase in staff is necessary. Our workload, I think, is ever increasing, and primarily due to increased development and associated staff review with developments in all your communities. An uptick in overall resident concerns, complaints, and inquiries for information, new priorities and projects with new city councils. You're all very busy, of course. And then some additional state and federal requirements. So we've really been running pretty lean. And again, this is something that we talked about last year but backed off on ultimately. The proposal will add something like $54,000 to our budget annually, which is not a small amount. The good news and what I would propose to do is we do have somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 in reserve funds. We like to keep our reserve funding level at about 1/3 of our total budget, which is about $600,000 right now. So we do have a little bit of extra wiggle room there. What I would propose is using about half that $53,000 from reserves, taking about the other half, actually increasing assessments to communities is where the other half would come from. I think we can probably get away with doing that for 2 or 3 years before our reserve level hits a level at which we don't want to reduce it any further. And that's essentially for rainy day. Essentially a rainy day fund in case the federal government does not come through with their funding. And then we've got to do a little bit backfill. As I mentioned, the formal budget will be provided to you for your consideration in January. That request represents roughly a 9% increase from our FY18 budget of approximately $600,000. And again, that's still less than the $670,000 budget we had back in 2015. That's when we reorganized staff and were able to lower everyone's assessments in the 20% range. So we've been doing pretty good here for a number of years. I would argue that if we can get by with doing just one additional project, traffic engineering type project for each one of your communities, that additional staff member would pay for itself. Most of you know you can't get a consultant really in the door for less than $20,000, maybe a little less than that. And really what this represents, even at full freight, 2 or 3 years out, when we're at the $50,000 extra in staffing, Iowa City would be about $25,000 extra per year. Johnson County would be at about 8, Coralville would be at about 7, and then it kind of trickles on down the line. So we're not talking about a huge investment, but an investment in the MPO nonetheless. If we don't move forward with a position, I think we'll start to see that the MPO will have to start denying some of the requests for additional work throughout the year. Every year when the work program's put together, you'll remember that we have our annual work program, and we'll have 20 or 30 large projects in that work program. And that's great, and we're able to fulfill all those requests. What a lot of you may not see are the number of requests that come in weekly and monthly from members on your technical advisory committees. And in fact, I've talked to 2 engineers just today for various communities asking for additional help. So this is something that comes in weekly, if not monthly. And again, that decision on whether to add that staffing is up to you all. But I think what you'll see is some additional denials just because we just don't have the time. I'm very proud of what our staff accomplishes. They're running on all cylinders. There's really no fluff at the MPO. But I think, again, we're just really starting to feel the pressure with all the development that's occurring in the county and really just trying to keep up. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about that, what that person would be doing and how assessments would look in the future, that sort of thing. And again, my job, I think, is just to steer the ship in the right direction. And, we'll make do with what we have. But I think at some point in time, if it's not this year, in the coming years, we're really going to have to think hard about our staffing levels.
Okay. Any questions for Kent?
What's going to be their position? What are they going to be doing?
Right. So the position right now, we've got 4.5 planners, essentially, including myself. And Sarah Walls with our staff works half-time. She works half-time with the City of Iowa City, half-time with the MPO. And what I'd really like to do, she's an assistant transportation planner is her title, and it would just be making that position full-time. Whether or not that position is actually filled by Sarah or not remains to be seen. But that would be the position as an assistant transportation planner, which, aside from myself, are all MPO staff.
Okay. Any other questions for Kent? I'm going to support the recommendation. I think that we've been running pretty lean. I think when you look at the fact that we're lower in staff level now than we were 5 years ago and how much this area has grown and how much more they're asked to do, it's one of those things that I think in all fairness to our staff, we need to give them the resources, not only, with computers and all that stuff, but just the personnel resources to be able to do the things that we're asking them to do, so.
I agree. I agree.
I fully concur. We're the second fastest growing county in the state. We have two of the fastest growing towns. Tiffin is the fastest growing by percentage, and North Liberty by raw numbers. The fact that you guys do what you do with the staff that you have is amazing, but I feel we need to give you the resources you need to keep us moving forward.
Appreciate that.
I agree. They've been wonderful. University Heights has asked for many more things too, and they've never turned me down and even kind of moved me up sometimes. And they've been running very lean. I know that I've been on this board on and off, but 2006, and this is the leanest staff I've seen, and I'm amazed at what they accomplish, just like all of you.
Well, I see nothing but increased requests as far as North Liberty is concerned by itself, so I have to underscore the increase.
Yeah, I would agree too. Tiffin, we don't have our own full-time staff, so we rely on them for things too. And I know our assessment's much less than the bigger towns, obviously, but it would really hurt us without our full-time help to be denied on some things where they help us with, because we got really nowhere else to go, so we would support it.
Yeah, we agree. We agree also. It's, as you're going to see this summer, it's going to be a little busy.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate all those comments. We don't, I don't take this lightly. I know that you all have your own requests at your city levels for staff that you have to deny for budgetary reasons, so we don't take it lightly. The nice part is that it's a half-time position and that it's split amongst all the different groups, which helps, ease the heartburn a little bit. But again, we don't take it lightly. We know adding staff is a difficult thing to do, but I wouldn't be asking if I didn't think it was the right thing to do.
Okay, I think you've got your direction.
Yeah, I do. So we will reflect that in the budget in January, and otherwise you're going to see essentially the same budget you've seen for years. Really no increases in travel expenses or software or anything else. Everything else is pretty much status quo.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right, sounds good. 3D, consider a grant application timeline for Transportation Alternatives Program funds allocated by the MPOJC. Kent?
Yes, thank you. Something that we've discussed in the past is that typically the MPO conducts our competitive grant process for both our surface transportation block grants and our transportation alternative program grants every other year. And we went through that process last spring for the surface transportation block grants. The biennial process has typically been the wish of both the Technical Advisory Committee and this board, because we're able to allocate larger amounts of funds to projects. Basically, it just adds to the amount of funding we have available. Also, it streamlines the process, so we're just doing this every other year, not every year. Due to changes in federal legislation, the Iowa DOT notified us last fall that there would be modifications to how the Transportation Alternative Program funds would be dealt with, and these are primarily the funds that we use on trails locally. Historically, that's what we've used for trails. What they had told us was, instead of doing going through our normal process, which is we go through the competitive process, the Technical Advisory Committee makes the recommendations to the board, and then we go through the political process and go ahead and program funds, that we would have to send all those applications to the DOT in October of every year and essentially have them sort of pre-approve the project. So it got a little bit messy. What they're now saying is we do not have to do that. So last spring, we went through the process just for the surface transportation block grant, and we had to hold back on the transportation alternative program funds, the trail funds. Now they're saying, basically they've swapped some funding around at the DOT level, and they're now saying, okay, you can use your old process, so we're able to move forward at any given time we want to. I'm suggesting that we wait to realign the two processes. So we could go through the process, the competitive process this fall, and we'd have about $550,000 worth of trail funding to allocate. What I'm suggesting is that we wait until spring of 19, and then we'll be able to realign both the funding programs at the same time. I think it's a good idea for a few reasons. One is that, again, we'll have a larger funding pool, and two, when we are able to work through both those funding mechanisms at the same time, we can actually spend some of the surface transportation funds on trails if we want to. So it streamlines the process, and then it provides us an opportunity to have better project planning at the same time. We did not have a regular technical advisory committee meeting this November. There wasn't a need to. But we did share this information with the Regional Trails and Bicycling Committee. And the Regional Trails and Bicycling Committee is typically the ones that make that recommendation to the TAC and then onto the board. It doesn't usually change. And they unanimously thought waiting until spring of 19 made sense to them.
Okay. In
In waiting, we'll have a little bit over $1 million next spring to allocate. So there's no downside to waiting. And again, we could do it either way, but streamlining the process, I think, makes more sense by waiting.
It's not going to hold up any projects?
No.
Okay.
No, these are all funds that have not been programmed. And you can actually see attached in the packet, I put in what is currently programmed.
Right.
Yeah, it shouldn't change anybody's project planning really, other than you may not know if you get a project award for an additional year.
Right, okay. Any questions or comments of Kent? I'm supportive of the recommendation.
Sounds good to me.
Everybody okay with it?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
We will move on, go back to my agenda here. 3E, consider required safety target setting for the MPO as required by the Federal Highway Administration.
Yeah, so the Federal Highway Administration now requires that MPO set targets for 5 safety performance measures as part of the Highway Safety Improvement Program, and then we need to report those to the state DOT in February every year. For each measure, we'll either need to choose to, 1, support the state's targets, which are shown in your memo, or 2, set our own quantifiable target. For each one of those 5 areas. In either event, we're going to be required in our transportation improvement program every year, and this is where we program those dollars we were just discussing under the last memo or the last agenda item. In the TIP each year, we're going to have to show how our projects make an effort to satisfy either the state's goals or goals that we set ourselves. We're also going to have to do the same thing in our long-range transportation plan, which isn't due till 2022 because we just approved it here recently. But we'll also have to make that same argument in our long-range transportation plan. There's no current penalties or restrictions on how our funding can be spent on projects that don't meet those stated goals, or at least try to strive to meet those stated goals, but I don't know if that will be the case in the future. Due to those uncertainties and reporting requirements, because we're not exactly sure what we're going to have to put in our TIP or the long-range plan at this point, the potential for future penalties by not meeting whatever targets we might set, I'm recommending that we go ahead and move forward with adopting the state's goals. The nice part is that we have to do this every year before February, so should we learn more information over the next year and decide it benefits our county to set our own goals, we can do it at that time. And that's really what I'm looking for tonight, is just a discussion on whether or not we want to adopt the state's goals or our goals. Either way, we will still have to have the same 5 categories, which is number of fatalities, fatality rate, number of serious injuries, serious injury rate, and then non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. It's just at the state level, obviously, we're all pitching in to try and program projects that are safe and well, safe for all modes of transportation. If we set our own, it's the same thing, but obviously the actual targeted measure is going to be different.
Questions or comments for,
So this will give us a greater degree of latitude initially until we get our own information sifted down or refined?
Terry, I don't know if it gives us any more latitude right now, because right now what they're saying are there's no penalties for not meeting these stated goals. So as long as we're making an effort to achieve the same goal that the state's trying to achieve, we should be fine. My fear is that if we set our own and we don't meet them, and a good example is fatalities. You know, the state's got 367.9 fatalities. That's going to be their target. And that would be what we would be buying into, is trying not to exceed that number. It's a 5-year average. What I'm worried about is if we would set our own fatality rate, it might be 2, you know, or some number that. But if next year then it increases to 3, and we've got this huge percentage jump in fatalities, that looks really bad. But when you've only got 1 or 2 fatalities a year, it's hard to juggle those numbers. So it's more or less the uncertainty on what the requirements are going to be in the future. And the Federal Highway Administration doesn't know exactly how they're going to use these, I don't think, at the current time. It's not uncommon when they get new legislation to not exactly know how all this is going to be rolled out and what it all means. So in our conversations with the DOT staff, I think they're not sure if there's going to be any penalties right now or any certain reporting requirements, but I think buying into what the state has right now and trying to support their efforts probably would be the path of least resistance. So I don't know if it buys us any more latitude, but I think it just, it might insulate us a little bit from having problems down the line.
It's the safer route to go.
I think it's the safer route to go. And like I said, the nice part is we have to do this annually anyway. So between now and February of 2019, we'll have more information on this. And if we want to set our own goals at that point in time and see that as beneficial, then we can do that. There's nothing that's going to restrict us from doing that. The other issue is this has to be done by this February, and we just learned about it in the last month or so. So even trying to figure out what our targets might be at this point, it's going to be a little bit tough.
It would be beneficial for everybody to have the same goals
Right.
anyway, so that that data information is more concise across the board than everybody
Right.
having different goals.
Yeah, I agree. We were trying to kind of noodle through how all this would look and potential consequences and that sort of thing. And at the end of the day, we're really trying to achieve the lowest number of fatalities with our projects anyway. You know, we're trying to design things as safely as possible. So we're really trying to achieve the same goals. I just am a little worried about getting hung up with certain specific target measures, especially because some of ours are going to be so small, any increase could look really bad. That's my concern.
I'm comfortable with the recommendation to go with the state
Yep.
lines. That makes sense?
Sounds good.
See a lot of nodding. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to 3F, discuss the Severson Challenge, Severson Charity Challenge for this holiday season. Sarah?
Hi, Sarah Walls with the MPO. Every year I come back to you to remind you of Linda Severson, our late colleague who was the MPO's Human Services Coordinator from 1994 until her death. For 6 years now, we've remembered Linda with this charity challenge that the staffs of all our different entities challenge themselves to raise money for a local charity. The last few years, our criteria for winning this fun, friendly competition has been improvement over the previous year's giving. Last year, Iowa City finally took home the trophy. I know staff is very excited about fundraising again this year, but I'm back here to see if the MPO is interested in doing it again and how you want to proceed.
I would say yes, and unless people have ideas for different ways, if it's not broken,
Sounds
don't
good to
fix
me.
it. Yeah. just
Iowa
let's-
City won it, so might as well line it up going.
And
You know what they say about percentages, when you start out low.
I'll continue engraving it even though I'm not on the board.
All
so
right,
just
thank you,
bring it
Terry.
to us. Or if
Thank
we
you.
need another cup someday, we'll provide that as well. So.
All right, put that in the minutes.
Thank
It is. Any other concerns or questions? All right, we'll keep going. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Okay. Item 4A, update on the I-380 corridor study. Brad?
Yeah, Brad Newman, Assistant Transportation Planner. The DOT recently completed a planning study regarding the impact on alternative modes of transportation in the I-380 Crandick corridor between Iowa City and Cedar Rapids. They looked at about a 26-mile corridor. This is part of the broader I-380 study that evaluated safety and capacity, and they just wanted to take a look at all their alternatives. They have these two corridors running parallel, so they wanted to make sure they had all of that studied. This specific study looked at long-term potential for commuter rail and automated transit systems. The study included a summary of recent multimodal studies, which quite a few of them are the ones we had completed on passenger rail. It also looked at conceptual short-term, long-term alternative uses in mode scenarios using a combination of passenger rail and automated vehicles. It was kind of interesting the way they had done this. They looked at everything from passenger rail all the way from Iowa City to Cedar Rapids. They looked at removing some or all of the Crandick Railway and putting in a paved surface for automated vehicles. They looked at a combination of the two, maybe taking rail up to the Eastern Iowa Airport and then getting on the road from there, getting into Cedar Rapids with automated vehicles. So it was an interesting study. They did come up with, they developed 5 different conclusions, and they're in your memo, and I want to make sure we go over those. The first one is to develop the development of I-80. Improvements are necessary in the short term, and all future transportation alternatives will be considered supplemental options and will not serve as a replacement for the additional roadway capacity that would be provided by widening I-380. So they just wanted to be clear that none of these alternatives would take the place of the necessary widening of 380. Preservation of the Crandall Corridor right-of-way as a public asset. They highly recommended that. They also looked at the phasing Crandall Corridor I lost my place here. Phase Crandall Corridor alternatives to match demand, which includes additional commuter rail study between Iowa City and North Liberty. They were very specific in the study that that portion between Iowa City and North Liberty was something that should be looked at. And I think most of their scenarios included that portion as rail. So automated vehicle implementation is best suited for connections to commuter rail service, and implementation of the commuter rail in the I-380 corridor right-of-way is not feasible, which means we've had questions of why don't they just put a rail system right down the middle of I-380, and they have determined that that was not feasible. The full study, the study itself is in draft form, that's why we didn't attach it. DOT is not quite ready to release it yet, but they did allow us to use some of this information for tonight. We can get that to you when it is final. Should be soon. And then the passenger rail portion I want to talk about in the next item. So,
Any questions for Brad on this part of it?
I guess I didn't see, are they looking at 6 lanes all the way from Iowa City to Cedar Rapids? Does that appear to be the direction?
Yes.
And in fact, I think the study stated that nothing done in terms of rail or automated vehicles supplants the need for that 6 lane. So I think the DOT's plan is, we're moving ahead with the 6 lane regardless of what comes out of either the DOT's plan
They were very
or
clear that these alternative modes would not take the place of 6 lane.
When the DOT had their planning meeting for the Forever Green Road exit, we had heard from the county, from a bunch of county farmers, that they didn't want to give up the right-of-way. So I spoke with the DOT about that and talked about Crandall and Line and a few other things. And they said, Mike, we need to take the right-of-way on the outside, because those residents wanted us to build the 3rd lane or on the inside like they did on I-80. And they said, Mike, well, the need for the 3rd lane, that ship has sailed. What we're trying to prevent is the 4th lane. Yeah. And so people are building into the right-of-way on the outside, so we need to get that now and then save the inside, not for rail, which is not feasible, but eventually for that 4th lane. And I said, oh gosh, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
Who actually makes that decision then, long-term, for the 6 lane? Is that?
DOT?
Yeah, it's the commission. The DOT commission ultimately will make that decision
Will they
and get it in their
ask us to
plan.
weigh in on that, or?
Yeah, the DOT is good about asking for public comment, and they'll certainly want some input from the MPO, a letter of support or not, whatever the case might be. Similar to what was done with the I-80, 380 interchange. All of those projects, if they touch our MPO urbanized area, which this would, the 6 laning would, have to be reflected in our transportation improvement program. So that's where we're programming our own funds, the STP and the TAP funds. We also have to reflect the programming of the DOT funds. And when we went through the 8380 project, that very question came up, because I think there were several members on this board that weren't a fan of the 8380 project or the cost for that matter. And when I asked how that would look if we actually did not approve that and put it in the TIP, at the time, the DOT, and this was a different project, but at the time, the DOT essentially said that's not going to hold us up, because what they would do is swap funds. So they would take the federal funds out and put state funds in, and spend the federal funds on a different project and take the state funds from a different project and supplant those and put those into this project, which then would have precluded us from having to put that in our TIP. So not that would happen for this project, and I'm not presuming anything that this board would say at the time, but that was how they would have handled that project. That project had also been planned for quite a while, and I felt like it was a little further along than the 6 laning. I may be wrong about that, but at least in my mind, that project was a little bit further along, which may have affected how the DOT would have handled that.
So we'll at least have the opportunity to vote on it at some point, and if we didn't authorize it, then at some point then
Yeah, and
switch funds.
correct. Unless I'm missing a piece, part of that 6-lane would be up near North Liberty, about halfway between Penn and Forever Green, which is where the current 6-lane project's going to stop. So that would touch our jurisdiction, which then I would assume some of those funds would have to be programmed in RTIP. Not 100% on that, but depending on how that works, it should be an RTIP.
Any other questions for Brad on this item?
Ken, or Brad, do we know what the cost of the widening would be?
I don't have it.
Yeah, I don't.
We don't have that information yet.
Okay, moving on to item 4B, an update on the Crandic passenger rail study. Brad?
Yeah, to continue with this same study, we've been waiting for the results of this study actually to determine whether or not to proceed with phase 3 of our passenger rail study. As you remember, we've already had 2 phases on passenger rail. The first phase was more of a broad look between Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, which the cost came in very high. The second phase was more concentrated on the Iowa City to North Liberty section, and those numbers actually came in at about $30 to $40 million to implement a passenger rail system. So we've been waiting since there were ridership figures as part of this study, so we wanted to get a hold of those first before we continued. And as I mentioned, all the scenarios in there that the DOT looked at, all of those scenarios included our numbers, the $30 to $40 million numbers for that section of the rail. Most of the costs in these scenarios ranged from $260 million to $683 million. And most of that cost was north of North Liberty as far as the rail was concerned. It's very difficult to get into Cedar Rapids without spending a lot of money on the rail. The study, though, when we talk about ridership, and it was kind of interesting, these are average weekday ridership numbers between Iowa City and North Liberty. In 2015, they gave an estimate of about 3,200. 2040, the year 2040, it was about 6,200 rides was the average weekday ridership. Now, these were using 30-minute headways, and they were very specific in the study that anything less than, they looked at 30-minute and I think 130-minute headways, and they highly recommended the 30-minute because your ridership was so much better. So based on all these proposed scenarios, the DOT concluded that the 8-mile Crandic segment between Iowa City and North Liberty was a natural first phase for alternative transportation use and offered the most viable option to using I-380. That was one of the things they determined in this study. The DOT, of course, recommends further analysis of this segment, and I know Iowa DOT and Crandic both have indicated that they are still willing to continue with those studies, a phase 3 study. And I just wanted to mention that this is, I think, the 4th study in the last 20 years that said passenger rail service between Iowa City and North Liberty was feasible. Any north of there, not yet. But this, again, indicated the same thing. So I guess we're back to asking to see what the board's interest is, and what I know we can't answer that question here tonight, but I guess we do ask that you go back and have those discussions with your entities and your see what the level of interest is to continue on the phase 3. Now, the phase 3 study would take some of those ridership numbers, and then we could work with the operating costs, because now we can kind of estimate what the revenue source would, or the revenue would be on a system like that, and then how that would operate. So we'd get more into the financial numbers.
We don't have a commitment yet, but you'll remember the last 2 studies we've done, phase 1 and phase 2, were in the $50,000 range, with Crandic Railroad picking up a third, the DOT picking up a third, and then all of our communities picking up the final third, which has been in the several thousands of dollars for each community. I forget what they were, but I want to say it was about $2,000 to each community for each study. So we're not talking about huge amounts of money, but funding nonetheless.
Okay.
For the $30 to $40 million, what were they talking about?
Right.
That was just,
$30 to $40 million included the infrastructure and rolling stock.
that's
Did
it.
not include stations. The stations would be up to the communities. But that was the track upgrade, the crossings, and two sets of rolling stock.
Infrastructure's still already there, though.
The base is, it would have to go to a welded rail system. They would have to replace that. They would obviously have to, some of the corners, some of the drainage would have to be improved. But the base is there. And Crandall, originally, when they came to us to talk about it, they had done the same thing to Amana from Cedar Rapids because they were taking everything out that way. And they think they can do that same thing here. And that's where those costs came from.
Okay, on the 3,200 riders in a year,
Well, that's a per weekday average, per day
Okay.
average. So it gets you about 800,000 rides a year.
I think that's low.
that's not the way I interpreted that. So it
think-
ranged from 3,200 riders in the year.
Well, it's average weekday ridership estimate.
That's low, though.
That-
That's way low.
Low?
Oh, I think that's tremendously high.
I think it could go higher. I really do. Maybe.
And that's not meaning that those 3,200 riders on an average work week would be riding from North Liberty necessarily. That's the total ridership. Yeah, total ridership.
Both ways.
Once it started, once the commute started, it's,
And that probably counts somebody twice. A round trip, they're probably counted twice.
Potentially.
Yes.
And, yeah, and it's hard to say whether those numbers are right or wrong, but that's the projection. And I think really what we're looking for is just that communities that are interested go back, talk to your respective city managers, councils, and see if there's any interest in a third study. At the same time, our job would be to go and talk to the DOT and the Crandall to see if they're still in for their third apiece commitment, because that makes a huge difference on how this looks for all of us. But we would do that part. We would ask you that you do your part and talk to your respective entities. And, if the answer is no, we're not interested, then we'll stop there. And if it's yes, then we'll move forward and ask each one of your communities again for that portion of funding.
And I do think it's important, if we don't move ahead with the Phase 3, that we do preserve that right-of-way if that issue ever comes up. And I think that's important, at the very least, to preserve it for the future.
well, I'm not speaking for the other councilmen, but I'm pretty sure that we would be interested in doing that.
Well, we'll put this on the January agenda again.
Okay.
And like I said, we'll do our homework, and you can all have your discussions as you see fit, and then we'll circle our horses and go from there.
Okay, sounds good.
And where does the line end at each end?
The current study, the 30 to 40 million was basically from Burlington, essentially the campus, up to Forever Green Road.
It's Gilbert Street is the end,
Yeah.
down, near the Wright Street Depot. Actually, right here
Right.
is the end of the line, on the north side of the parking ramp, right out here.
And I think,
And then it goes up to Forever Green.
right, and I think the bulk of that ridership would end probably at the Oakdale campus area, perhaps. I mean, that's just my own opinion of the matter, but I think that's where a lot of that ridership projection is probably coming from, is university students and faculty from Oakdale campus back to the main campus, hospital employees, that sort of thing.
I think they looked at 5 to 7 stops along the way, somewhere in that range.
Now, to put things in perspective, too, the 3 local transit systems hit about 7 million rides a year. So, putting things in perspective for what you might consider a reasonable ridership number, we're about 7 million for the 3 transit systems.
Any other questions for Brad? Okay, thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to 5A, an update from the Johnson County, Aaron, representative on the East Central Iowa Council of Governments.
Yeah, I invited Aaron to speak tonight. We've been trying to do this at least once a year for the last half dozen years or so to get updates on things that might be of interest that Aaron's been working on with the East Central Iowa Council of Governments. Thanks for coming, Aaron.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. Good to see everyone.
Yes.
You know, I will say, though, it's been 2 years, and I still am not quite sure exactly what ECI-COG does. No, I'm just kidding. But,
I can believe it.
I just, I made a couple notes here. Let me just go through here. And again, as Ken said, just to highlight some of the things that ECI-COG is involved in specifically to Johnson County. So I'll kind of start on the housing and community development side of things. You know, they're currently working with the city of Shueyville on some development reviews, specifically kind of helping them update their land use plan. They're also working with the city of Coralville, kind of administering some community development block grant funds for some of the flood improvements that the city of Coralville has been working on. As part of their housing trust fund, they awarded this year a total of $35,000 to help repairs for 5 homes here in Johnson County. And also Doug Elliott, the executive director, has been working with the Johnson County Homeless Coordinating Board, helping them here in August and September, worked with them on 2 strategic planning sessions to help them kind of update their strategic plan going forward, and also has some plans to do something similar with the Johnson County Affordable Housing Coalition here coming up in December. So those are some of the highlights on the housing and community development side of things. Moving forward from the transportation and regional development, as part of the business assistance revolving loan program administered through ECI-COG. There's currently 11 loans out to Johnson County businesses, totaling just over $1 million, again, assisting these businesses in a variety of different capacities. And also, as part of their Corridor Rides program, there are actually 3 van pools currently serving VA hospital employees as part of that program from the transportation side. And then finally, on the solid waste and environmental services, there's the ECI-COG is currently working with the Clear Creek Watershed Coalition, helping them, assisting them in doing some of the planning, as well as also administering some CDBG funds for that project as well. So that was really the highlights that I had to share from ECI-COG as it relates to Johnson County. So if there is any questions, I would be happy to try to answer them, or at a minimum, bring those back to the board and get some answers for you.
Any questions for Aaron?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, having served on there, it's a wide range of things that ECCOG does, and so it takes a while to kind of get a handle on all of that. Okay. Any other business?
Yes, if you would, please. Is Iowa City going to do a consultant study on your bus system?
I'm not sure if we're bringing in a consultant yet. We're definitely going to review our bus system. We're starting that after the first of the year, once we get our new transit director in place.
Okay, because the thing is I think some of us want to explore the possibility of maybe piggybacking on that, if
Okay.
possible.
Okay. I will mention that to staff.
Okay, thank you.
Any other business? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Couldn't wait to get that out, could you?
Do we have a second?
Second. Oh, no, I got it here.
Terry, okay, moved by Dickens, seconded by Donahue. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Thank you, Terry Dickens.
Thanks,
Your
everyone.
last one.